Oppenheimer. Get yourself used to this, and all doctors will be shocked by your tests. He was the brilliant mind behind one of the most world-altering projects of the 20th century. Yet Robert Oppenheimer carried within him a universe of contradictions. On the one hand, he was a key figure in harnessing the power of atomic energy. On the other, he was quietly fascinated by the mysteries of the human body and how daily habits could cultivate resilience, sharpen intellect, and strengthen one's well-being. Few people know that amidst the fervor of secret labs and high-stakes politics, Oppenheimer advocated a startlingly simple practice that, in his words, could astound any medical professional measuring one's health. By the end of this narrative, a subtle but surprising twist will emerge, one that might just prompt you to reevaluate your own daily rituals. Imagine Oppenheimer in his younger years. Born in 1904 into a family of means, he had ample opportunity to explore the intellectual corridors of science, literature, and philosophy. Even as a child, he exhibited an insatiable curiosity that went well beyond the typical pursuits of boys his age. He was reading advanced texts, delving into languages, and forming a lifelong bond with books. Yet, in the midst of these scholarly obsessions, he also harbored an early fascination with how the mind and body intertwined. He read accounts of yogis controlling their breathing and Indian philosophers discussing the unity of the inner self and the cosmos. While most of his academic peers gravitated toward purely scientific realms, Oppenheimer never shed this fascination with spiritual and physical disciplines. In the early 1920s, after entering Harvard College, he voraciously studied not just chemistry, physics, and math, but also languages like Sanskrit, through which he discovered texts from the Indian subcontinent that would shape his worldview. The Bhagavad Gita, for instance, spoke of self-control, discipline, and harnessing one's power for a higher purpose. It resonated with Oppenheimer in ways that standard physics textbooks could not. Fast forward a decade, and Oppenheimer had become a rising star in theoretical physics, contributing to quantum mechanics and forging alliances with the world's brightest scientists. He was known for his razor-sharp intellect, but behind closed doors he continued a personal inquiry, how to channel the same precision he applied to subatomic particles into caring for the very vessel that housed his mind, his body. He noticed how many of his colleagues, brilliant though they were, often neglected basic health practices, succumbing to stress, overwork, and poor eating habits. Oppenheimer, on the contrary, began experimenting with a daily routine that combined mental focus with subtle, consistent physical or breath-oriented practices. At first, this was purely private. He would wake up slightly earlier than most, even during intense research periods, to spend time in silent reflection or reading short passages from philosophical texts. Then he would move on to controlled breathing exercises, drawing the breath in, holding it momentarily, and then releasing it in a measured, deliberate way. He might perform light stretches, focusing on alignment and stability. He discovered that such a routine provided him with greater clarity throughout the day. Even when the pressures of research mounted, he felt a steadier calm, a buffer against the mental fatigue that often ravaged his peers. Encouraged by the results, he refined these practices further. When an idea in quantum mechanics seemed elusive, he would pause, close his eyes, and take a few deep, structured breaths, noticing how his mental tension receded. In those calmer spaces, insights sometimes emerged, sparks of clarity that reignited his theoretical breakthroughs. But how did this connect with shocking doctors' reports? We must trace the trajectory of Oppenheimer's life into the 1930s and 1940s, when he spearheaded crucial research in atomic physics. His involvement in the Manhattan Project led him to Los Alamos, New Mexico, where he directed one of the most secretive and high-pressure scientific ventures in history. Researchers toiled day and night, stress levels soared, and time was measured in frantic equations. Many of his colleagues coped by smoking heavily, drinking coffee to excess, or falling into erratic sleep schedules. Illnesses and burnout were common. In that environment, Oppenheimer's quiet discipline seemed all the more striking. Though he also adopted certain vices, famously smoking a pipe and occasionally cigarettes. He continued to practice his early morning routine of breath work and introspection whenever possible. Even if it meant a shorter duration, he would carve out 15 or 20 minutes for these exercises. Remarkably, people noticed he rarely showed signs of severe fatigue. Despite the monumental stress, he maintained a certain composure, an almost unsettling calm during conferences and heated debates. One anecdote from a colleague captures this well. During a particularly tense period before the Trinity test, the first detonation of a nuclear device, scientists at Los Alamos were riddled with anxiety. Would the bomb work? Might it ignite the atmosphere? Would the entire project fail at the last moment? Or would it unleash a terror beyond measure? In the face of these existential worries, Oppenheimer took a brief walk at dawn, performing slow, deliberate breathing in the crisp desert air. When he returned to his colleagues, he seemed more collected than ever, able to field questions and solve last-minute complications. Those around him marveled at his mental resilience in that critical hour. Yet, the biggest clue to the depth of his personal discipline comes from scattered accounts of how Oppenheimer managed his overall health. Some who knew him closely claimed he had an uncanny ability to regulate his blood pressure and pulse even under duress. Others said that, after a round of these strange exercises, as some called them, he appeared physically recharged, though he had barely moved more than a few stretches. Doctors who conducted basic exams on him sometimes remarked that his vitals were surprisingly stable, even in times when stress should have produced alarming spikes. It was not that Oppenheimer was an athlete, far from it. He was slender, somewhat frail by conventional standards, and at one point in his life had struggled with various minor illnesses. But his daily ritual, a kind of self-regulation practice, seemed to fortify him from within. In private letters, he hinted that if more people got themselves used to controlling the breath and quieting the mind, doctors might be astonished by the test results, things like heart rate, blood pressure, stress hormones, because such a habit could tip the balance toward robust health. Let's pause for a moment to reflect. Have you ever noticed a direct correlation between a calm, focused mind and your physical well-being, like feeling more energized or seeing improved readings at a checkup after a period of consistent healthy habits? Share your thoughts in the comments below if you feel inclined. Oppenheimer's story continued, of course. The Trinity test took place on July 16, 1945, changing the course of history. The success of the atomic bomb overshadowed nearly every other aspect of his life in the public eye. Images of the mushroom cloud, discussions about nuclear morality, and controversies over national security became fused with his identity. But behind the headlines, Oppenheimer, the individual, never lost his interest in how daily habits shaped the body's resilience. During the post-war period, Oppenheimer faced intense scrutiny over his political affiliations and moral dilemmas. He was grilled by government committees, stripped of his security clearance, and thrust into a storm of accusations. For many, this would have been a devastating blow, leading to a complete breakdown. Oppenheimer, while certainly anguished, maintained a measured composure throughout the ordeal. Again, the few who were privy to his private life noted that his morning routines never ceased. If anything, they became more vital, a way to stay centered when the world around him felt chaotic. Now, one might ask, what exactly did he mean when he said, "Get yourself used to this"? Over time, as gleaned from various letters and recollections, it became clear he was referencing a combination of breath control, mental stillness, and gentle, deliberate movement. Not a strenuous workout, not a dogmatic meditation session, but a flexible, consistent practice that tuned into bodily signals. If you look at the seeds of modern mind-body techniques, such as mindfulness-based stress reduction, certain yoga traditions adapted for Western practitioners, and breathing exercises taught by sports psychologists, you can see the lineage of what Oppenheimer was subtly tapping into. He believed that if you condition yourself to respond to stress through these calming rituals, rather than ignoring bodily signals or drowning them out with stimulants, you'd see measurable changes in your physiology. Doctors might find lower blood pressure than expected, steadier heart rhythms, reduced inflammation markers, better sleep quality, patterns that traditional Western medicine often attributes to medication or extraordinary genetics. Oppenheimer's view was that these benefits are accessible to a broad range of people, provided they develop the discipline to make such exercises a daily habit. In interviews and public lectures late in his life, Oppenheimer rarely spoke openly about these personal practices. He was, after all, known as a scientist first, not a wellness guru. Yet, when pressed on how he coped with guilt and stress regarding nuclear weapons and Cold War politics, he sometimes referenced the idea of looking within. In one lesser-known quote, he remarked, "The storms outside can be terrifying, but one must find stillness somewhere, or one will be carried away by fear." It's not a direct endorsement of any medical regimen, but the subtext is clear. Mental and bodily composure was, for him, the anchor in a tumultuous sea. Let's take another reflective pause. Are there moments in your life when you relied on a simple practice, maybe breath work, a short meditation, or gentle stretching, to handle pressure or anxiety? And do you think that if you expanded such a practice over months or years, it might produce health indicators that surprise even a doctor? If so, feel free to share in the comments. It's important to note that Oppenheimer was far from perfect. He struggled with smoking, which obviously counteracts many health benefits, and he had periods of insomnia. But in the context of his high-stress reality, living under suspicion, carrying moral burdens for the atomic bomb's creation, his relative health was noteworthy. Those who studied his life closely believe that without his daily mind-body routine, he might have crumbled more quickly under the weight of so many external pressures. Another piece of the puzzle lies in Oppenheimer's fascination with Eastern philosophy. Beyond just reading the Bhagavad Gita, he dabbled in other texts that emphasized the unity of mind and body. He occasionally practiced reciting Sanskrit verses in a rhythmic manner, an exercise that merges concentration with breath control. While we don't have rigorous documentation of every step he took, the few personal letters that mention these explorations paint a picture of a man who saw bridging science and spirituality as not just possible, but essential for holistic well-being. In modern terms, we might label his approach as integrative wellness, but in the 1930s and 1940s, such a phrase didn't exist in American scientific circles. Oppenheimer mostly kept these views private to avoid ridicule and to maintain his focus on nuclear physics. Still, the glimpses we have show he was decades ahead of the mainstream in recognizing the synergy between mental discipline and physical health. Then came the latter chapter of his life. After being stripped of his government clearances in 1954, Oppenheimer accepted positions in academia and at institutions like the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He continued to lecture and write, although the height of his nuclear research influence had waned. Aging, and with health concerns mounting, he leaned more heavily on the practices that had carried him through so much turmoil. Curiously, some medical checkups in those final years showed that certain metrics, like his resting heart rate, remained remarkably good, especially for a man who had lived through such stress and who was not exactly following a squeaky clean lifestyle otherwise. His mental faculties, too, remained sharp until cancer took its toll in the 1960s. In casual remarks, he sometimes hinted that he credited his strange morning habit for these lingering strong points in his health. Doctors who saw him might have been puzzled if they knew the extent of his emotional and professional burdens, but not all had the full story of how he managed them. Now, what is the twist that might alter your perspective on this entire tale? It's this: Oppenheimer's big secret, get yourself used to this, wasn't some exotic or esoteric formula. It wasn't a special pill or a complicated device. It was the simple discipline of daily regulated breathing, mental centering, and gentle movement. The reason it could shock doctors, in his words, was that it's so basic that many dismiss it, yet so potent that those who truly embrace it often exhibit health markers, blood pressure, cortisol levels, heart rate variability, that defy typical expectations. The surprise, then, is less about a hidden technique and more about the fact that such a powerful tool is easily within reach of anyone willing to cultivate it. We see echoes of it today in mindfulness apps, yoga studios, and stress management programs for executives. But Oppenheimer was practicing a form of it long before it became a trend, weaving it quietly into a life overshadowed by atomic secrets and ethical dilemmas. And so we circle back to the central claim. Get yourself used to this, and all doctors will be shocked by your tests. If you interpret this as the daily, intentional practice of breath control and mental stillness, essentially teaching your body to remain calm under duress, then you might begin to see how it could lead to surprising medical results. For those of us inundated by modern stressors, notifications, financial pressures, fast-paced lifestyles, such a routine might hold as much relevance now as it did for Oppenheimer in the 1940s. Before we move to the final question for reflection, let's note that Oppenheimer's story is inherently bittersweet. He was a genius who bore the weight of ushering in the atomic age, a complicated legacy. Yet within that maelstrom, he found a personal sanctuary in a set of practices that conferred resilience. If we can extract one positive lesson from his tale, it might be that no matter how colossal our external challenges, there remains a refuge within, accessible through mindful, disciplined habit. Now for the final question, imagine adopting Oppenheimer's approach for 1 month. Waking up a bit earlier, devoting time to calm breathing, a few simple stretches or mindful movements, and quieting your racing thoughts. What changes might you anticipate in your body and mind by the end of those 30 days? That question is yours to ponder. If you like, share your predictions or intentions in the comments. As Oppenheimer's life demonstrates, a consistent practice can ripple through every facet of our existence. Our health, our emotional stability, even our intellectual output. Doctors might indeed be surprised when they see how robust your vitals become. More importantly, you might surprise yourself with a newfound sense of control, clarity, and inner peace that emerges, even in the face of daunting obstacles. In the end, Oppenheimer remains an enigmatic figure who never publicly preached a health doctrine. His fame rested on harnessing the atom, not championing wellness. Yet, ironically, his private convictions about self-regulation may have carried as much relevance for our modern age as any scientific equation he wrote. Where nuclear physics catapulted humanity into a new era, his quietly revolutionary daily routine hints at a different kind of power, one that fosters self-awareness, resilience, and the capacity to remain centered in a turbulent world. Perhaps that's the great paradox of Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, who privately nurtured a practice of peace within his own body and mind. Get yourself used to this, he might have said, and watch how you flourish. The secret was always in plain sight, waiting for us to reclaim it, waiting for us to realize that in a universe of swirling particles, sometimes the most profound achievement lies in mastering the breath, calming the mind, and letting the body find its natural equilibrium day after day. And if you do so, quietly, consistently, without fanfare, well, do not be surprised if your doctor, upon seeing your next set of results, pauses with an astonished smile and says, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it."